So we're going to take a quick tour of the different applications that Weka makes available. We can see we have the Explorer open here in the background. This is something that we have been working with largely in all the tutorials that I have shown you. And it allows you to do a bunch of things. You can see up here we have the tabs. So once we open an ARF file, we can classify, cluster, visualize, and so on. So that's what we're familiar with, but we haven't really looked at these other options. So I want to take a quick tour through those. The first that we're going to look at really briefly is the Simple CLI, that's command line interface. Because Weka is Java based, you can execute essentially Java commands from the command line. And the Simple CLI gives you a command line interface where you can type those commands. So if you're comfortable working with Java, you can use this just like you would use a Unix shell and run your commands from there. That's beyond the scope of what I'm going to cover in these tutorials, but if you're interested, this is the place you can play with that. Now let's take a look at the experimenter. This is an interface where if you want to run a whole bunch of different experiments with the same data set or with a set of data sets, you can do it here. So to do this, you can open an experiment if you have one, but since we're just doing this for the first time, you can click New. And there's a few things that you have to pick. The first is your results destination. So this is an ARF file that's going to be output. And so you want to go ahead and pick one that you have created already. You can see here some of the ARF files we've worked with. I will call this test.out.arf, and that's where all of our results are going to go. Next, we pick what kind of experiments do we want to do. This is the same as what we saw in the experimenter. We have the same kinds of options here. I'm going to leave this on what's pretty typical, a 10-fold cross-validation. And now under data sets, we can add in a whole bunch of different data sets. So in the experimenter, we would open one data set and run an experiment with it, which was fine, but maybe you have a whole bunch of different data sets and you want to run the same classifiers over them. Here you can add a bunch of different things. So I'm just going to look at some that I have in here. We have the iris file, and then I also have a few, I'll put in this test.arf. So we have a few different data sets here. And then you may just put one here, you may have multiples, but once you've added all your data sets, then you pick the algorithms that you want to run. And again, this is just like the experimenter. The interface is a little bit different, but you can pick from all the lists of algorithms that were available with all the same parameters, and you can make a list of them here. The most common way that I've used this in my work is that I'll have one or two data sets that I've created that I want to classify, and I'm interested in seeing which algorithms work best, and so I'll put a whole bunch, sometimes all the possible algorithms that can work in this list and run it. Once you do that, you can actually go ahead and start the classification. That's going to give you your output in the file that you have here. What it's going to give you is the output of every single run for each algorithm and for each data set. And then you can do your own statistics to compute the overall accuracy, the ROC AUC, whatever you like. And so this essentially gives you a way to run a bunch of different classifiers over potentially a bunch of different data sets. A lot of it is similar to what we have seen in the Explorer, just the tabs are different. So once you have it all set up, if you want to run it, you can click Start here, and there's some problems here for the data sets that I've provided, but essentially this will run each of your different classifiers on each of your different data sets. You can then look at some of the results over here once you get them in the Analyze tab, or you can actually look at the output file. So that's the experimenter. It gives you this ability to load up a bunch of data, run a bunch of algorithms, and compare the results. Knowledge flow is an interesting sort of thing that allows you to put together different processes. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to show you some of the options. So essentially this allows you to visually put together the process of doing classification from the point of loading your data set through the classification. So for example, let's look under data sources here, and there's a thing called ARF loader that allows us to load an ARF file. And so we're going to click on that, and then I can click here in the main kind of visualization space and plunk that in there. So that basically represents the step of using the ARF loader. Then I'm going to look under evaluation here, and I'm going to look at this item called class assigner. This is going to allow us to say which column, basically which feature in the ARF file that we load is going to be the class that we're going to use our classifier on. What are we going to classify? And so I can plunk that in here. So now I have two different steps. We're going to load the ARF, and then we're going to say which column is the class. I want to connect those now to basically say first we do this, and then we flow over to this next step. To do that, you can right-click, or if you're on a Mac like me, you can do Option-click and select Dataset, and that gives you this little rubber band thing that you drag over basically to the blue dot on Class Assigner, and now we can see those are connected. And so you can step together a whole bunch of different things. We could add in a classifier, we could add in a visualizer. You see there's a whole bunch of options over here, filters and so on. And so basically this doesn't give you any functionality you don't have otherwise. It just allows you to do that visually and go ahead and try the process that way. So if you're interested in doing that kind of visual layout, this is something to experiment with. If you want to get more details on how to use it, there's a ton of great YouTube tutorials on using the knowledge flow environment. So that's a way that you could probe this more deeply. And then finally, there's the workbench. And the Weka workbench is basically every other thing in Weka all smushed together. So it's actually quite a lot like the Explorer, which is what most of the tutorials that you've seen from me focus on. But you can see it also has this simple command line interface up here. If you look at all these tabs across the top, they basically map to all the other features or applications that are visible. So this data mining processes, this is the workflow that we just saw. It's exactly that same interface. The experiment here, this is the experimenter interface. And all these other tabs here, starting with pre-process, are the same as the Explorer interface. So the workbench basically collects together all the different interfaces that Weka provides and puts them all in one place. So if you don't want to just stick to one, if you want to work in just one single window instead of switching between applications, the workbench allows you to do that. So there you go. We've looked a lot at the Explorer, but that gives you a little taste of what's available in the other applications that show up in this GUI chooser when you launch Weka.